The drizzle that morning wasn't enough to stop traffic, but it was enough to blur the windshield of the silver gray pickup truck parked across the street from Sunrise Diner number 28. Raindrops smeared the view like the town itself was trying to cover up something Jackson Reeves had ignored for too long. He sat behind the wheel longer than he needed to. His coffee grabbed from a gas station minutes earlier sat untouched. So did the toast wrapped in wax paper. Breakfast wasn't the point. Not today. On the dashboard was a worn-out name tag, Walt Simmons. It wasn't his name, just a borrowed identity for what he planned to do. The faded flannel shirt he wore matched the identity, perfectly ordinary, unremarkable, invisible. Exactly what he needed to be. Through the rain-fogged window, Jackson could already see them, the early shift crew shuffling behind the counter. From this distance, they looked like moving shadows. But their posture, their pace, it wasn't exhaustion he saw. It was something colder, resigned, mechanical. Like they weren't working, they were just surviving. Jackson Reeves, 52, CEO and founder of Sunrise Restaurant Group, had built this company from the ground up. He knew what passion looked like. He knew what burnout looked like. And he knew deep in his gut something here was very, very wrong. 3 straight quarters of strong revenue, yet the highest staff turnover in the region. An HR report showing employee disengagement with no red flags attached. On a paper, this branch was thriving, but the numbers weren't telling the truth. He had learned a long time ago the most dangerous problems are the ones that don't show up in reports. A phrase he'd once told his first wave of regional managers echoed in his mind. If you want to know whether a restaurant is healthy, don't ask the GM, watch how the staff pours coffee at 7 a.m. Today he was about to put that theory to the test. He opened the truck door and stepped into the morning chill. The bell above the diner door jingled faintly as he entered. No one looked up. No one greeted him. Only the bell seemed to acknowledge his presence. And in that moment, something began. He chose a corner booth, good sightlines, low visibility. From behind the counter, a waitress in a frayed apron moved with silent precision. No flash, no flare, just quiet intention. She wasn't rushing, but every motion had purpose. Her hair was pulled back into a neat tie. Her name tag read, Cassie. And unlike the others, Cassie wasn't drifting. Moments later, she approached his table, setting down a cup of steaming black coffee and a single slice of toast. 2 miniature packets of jam rested delicately on the side of the plate. She placed them with care, no clatter, no sound. Black coffee and toast, she said softly. I added butter and jam for you just in case. Jackson nodded, keeping his voice neutral. Appreciate it. Then casually, as if making harmless conversation, he added, busy morning, huh? Bet the tips are good at this hour. It was subtle, but he caught it, a flicker in her eyes. Just a flash, but it was there. A hesitation. Her hands didn't flinch, but her voice dipped just below the hum of the espresso machine. Mornings are the worst for tips, she said, especially when we split them. But only a few actually get anything. Her words hit him harder than they should have. Jackson didn't react, not visibly. But in his chest, something shifted. The words only a few actually get anything didn't sound like an excuse. They sounded like an unspoken truth finally allowed to breathe. He sipped his coffee. It had already gone cold. The bitterness wasn't from the beans, it was from something deeper. Cassie drifted back to the floor, moving from table to table with practiced grace. She cleared plates, refilled mugs, folded napkins with muscle memory born of repetition, not pride. She did it all while 2 other employees, Tyler slick-haired and crisp, and Chase slightly older but equally idle, lingered by the POS terminal. Neither of them carried trays, neither served tables. They tapped the POS screen, occasionally swiping cards and crossing their arms afterward, like gatekeepers to some invisible vault. Every tip passed through that terminal. And Cassie. She hadn't gone near it once. Jackson watched her closely. When she passed again, he asked quietly, why don't you take the payments yourself? She didn't stop moving, but her voice dropped as she reached for an empty plate. I don't have access, she said. Only certain roles are allowed. I'm listed as supplemental staff. Her words chilled him. Not because they were shocking, but because they weren't. This wasn't a glitch. This was structure. A system designed not to fail, but to exclude. He looked toward the register. Behind it, the branch manager, Brad Coleman, stood chatting with a regular. His shirt was pressed, his smile well-practiced. On the surface, he looked like the picture of professionalism. But now Jackson knew what lay beneath. Cassie leaned in slightly, barely moving her lips. Brad sets up the roles, she said. Tyler's his nephew. He gets morning shifts, full access. Jackson said nothing, but the way his jaw clenched said everything. The system was never meant to be this way. He'd built POSOs to be transparent, role-based fair. What had once been a tool for equality had been twisted into a weapon of favoritism. Then Cassie did something that caught him off guard. She reached into her apron and pulled out a small worn notebook. The edges were bent. The cover was soft from handling. She held it like it was something sacred. I didn't want to complain, she said. I just needed to know I wasn't crazy, so I started writing it down. Jackson took it carefully. Each page held records, dates, table numbers, bill totals, POS tips versus tips actually received. Discrepancies were circled in red ink. Notes filled the margins. Timestamps, patterns, evidence. Not an accusation, a map, a confession. I've lost over $600 this month, she whispered. But what hurts more is no one asked. No one ever asked who's dividing the tips or how. He closed the notebook gently, not with finality, but with reverence. A restaurant could survive low margins, even bad reviews. But when the people holding it together no longer believed the system saw them, that's when it began to rot from the inside out. He didn't flip through the pages again. He didn't need to. Everything he needed to know had already been confirmed. And now Jackson Reeves was no longer just a man in flannel. He was a CEO with a mission. The evidence was handwritten, quiet, and damning. Jackson Reeves knew this wasn't just favoritism, it was the first thread in a system built to hide theft in plain sight. The rain had stopped, but inside Jackson Reeves a storm was gathering. He sat still in the corner booth of Sunrise Diner No. 28, the worn notebook Cassie had handed him resting on the table, like a sleeping animal, fragile but alive. He hadn't moved in 5 minutes. The toast was untouched. The coffee had long gone cold. None of it mattered. He had the first piece. Cassie hadn't accused anyone. She hadn't whined. She hadn't even asked for help. All she had done was record what the system refused to admit. Date after date, table after table, the totals printed on the POS terminal versus the tips she actually received, each discrepancy circled in red. Notes in the margins like quiet screams. Did 5 tables received? Rasimiro. Tyler processed all payments again. Chase said it was already entered, no way to verify. There was nothing hysterical about it. That's what made it powerful. It wasn't a complaint. It was evidence. The kind of evidence only someone who had been ignored for too long would bother collecting. Jackson's fingers hovered above the pages. Then instinct took over. Without drawing attention, he slipped his hand into his coat pocket, pulled out his phone, and slowly began taking photos of each page. One by one. No flash, no sound. Just quiet clicks and flicks of the camera as years of CEO instinct kicked in. He wasn't angry, not yet. What he felt was sharper than anger clarity. A truth he had been circling for months had just taken form. It had a name, a face, a date, and now it had handwriting. As Cassie moved across the floor, balancing trays with that same worn grace, Jackson pulled a folded sticky note from his wallet and scribbled in block letters. Keep documenting, but don't give this to anyone. Wait for me to return. He slid the note carefully into the notebook's front cover, closed it gently, and nudged his coffee mug just enough to hide it from view. Then he looked back toward the counter. Brad Coleman, polished shirt, relaxed smile, was nowhere in sight. But Tyler was still there, standing confidently behind the POS terminal, like a sentry guarding secrets. That's when Jackson saw something. Tyler wasn't just ringing up orders. His hands moved with a different rhythm now. No customer was nearby. Yet his fingers danced across the screen with the familiarity of someone navigating a hidden menu. Tap, swipe, flip, pause. For a split second, the screen angled just right, and Jackson caught a glimpse. User Tyler C. Role Advanced Access Privileges. Modify payment routing, sub-roles, terminal overrides. Jackson's grip tightened on his cup. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. Tyler, a part-time server, had admin-level access. And from the confident way he moved, he'd had it for a while. The next moment, a trainee young, clearly new, fumbled with a tray near table 5. She hesitated, unsure how to enter a comp request on the handheld terminal. Cassie swooped in still, without breaking her stride. She crouched beside the trainee and whispered softly while demonstrating. Here, tap this first. Then go into order modifiers, always flag allergy info. Then her voice dropped to a near whisper, so soft only someone within inches could hear. Careful not to let Tyler help you with entries. He's not wrong, he just won't do it for you. Jackson heard that, and it shook him. Cassie wasn't just surviving, She was protecting the others. She had become a firewall, a quiet moral anchor in a broken system, and no one had noticed. No one had asked. Then came the second fracture. Chase, the other morning shift server, tapped the POS screen beside Tyler and frowned. Huh, that's weird, he muttered. I could log in yesterday. Today it says restricted access. Tyler didn't look up. He just offered a casual smirk and replied, probably just a glitch. I'll take care of it. Jackson tilted his head slightly. On the surface, it was a normal exchange. But in his mind, the second pin just dropped on a mental map. This wasn't just favoritism, it was configuration manipulation. Custom roles, controlled access, backdoor privileges. If you were clever, it wouldn't look like theft. It would just look like policy. That's what chilled Jackson the most, how clean it all looked. He didn't need coffee anymore. His blood was already heating. From the outside, the system worked. Revenue looked healthy. Turnover was written off as industry norm. The staff still smiled for customers. But Jackson knew now. The system had been rigged. And worse, it had been designed to hide the rigging. A few minutes later, Cassie returned to check on the tables. She paused just long enough for Jackson to give her a look. Not alarmed, not urgent, just intentional. Her eyes flicked to the notebook still under his coffee cup. She didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. She understood. As she moved away, Jackson pulled out his phone once more. This time he tapped a name he hadn't called in 6 months. The line rang once, then twice. On the third ring, a calm voice answered. Reeves, she said, talk to me. Mara, he replied, we have a problem. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask for context. He continued, Pilosos is being manipulated. I need you in quiet. Audit everything line by line. Every role assignment, every tip routing change, every hidden account. Understood, Marilyn replied. She was the head of internal investigations, a ghost in the system, who had quietly dismantled 3 embezzlement rings in the last 4 years. She didn't need a map. She was the map. By the time Jackson stood to leave, everything had changed. He walked out of Sunrise Diner, Washington 28, without a backward glance. The sky had cleared. The rain was gone. But the real storm, the one building inside him, was just beginning. And now, thanks to a woman with a frayed apron and a notebook no one was supposed to care about, he had a reason. He had evidence. And he had a name. The call had lasted exactly 93 seconds. That was all Jackson Reeves needed. By the time he ended the conversation with Marlene, the head of internal investigations at Sunrise, she had already begun her work. No small talk. No recap. She'd once dismantled an internal laundering ring without leaving her office. Jackson knew she wouldn't hesitate now. The clock had started ticking the moment he said Posos is being manipulated. Within the hour, Sunrise Diner No. 28 looked the same from the outside diners. Chatting coffee machines, hissing servers, moving table to table. But under the surface, the entire digital ecosystem had been flipped into a different gear. Silent audit mode. A hidden configuration within Posos built for emergencies. No employee saw it activate. No screen flashed. No alerts pinged. But everything from that moment on was being recorded, mirrored, and flagged, line by line. Every terminal touch, every tip assignment, every role override. It was like wiring a house while the lights were still on. The staff kept moving, but now so was the truth. Marlene's team wasn't just watching, they were reconstructing an entire map of abuse, one breadcrumb at a time. The first anomaly surfaced the next morning. Finding Grudhu 1. There existed a hidden access tier within Posos called Preferred Internal. It didn't show up on the public-facing role settings. Only back-end admin logs could detect it. This tier had been granted to 3 accounts. Brad Coleman, Churichinowaj, Tornaira 1 branch manager. Tyler C., part-time server. Kitchen support 3, an unassigned phantom staff record. The third account didn't match any official hire. No onboarding file, no payroll ID. But it had been used 21 times in 25 days to approve transactions and reroute digital tips. Finding Nafit 2. Digital tip totals across branch 28 over the past 30 days had reached $4,120. Of that, 67% had been routed through Tyler C's account, even though he had only served 14.7% of the total tables based on ticket data. In raw numbers, he received more than 4 times the tip share of the next closest server, Cassie. Finding Namar Kathur. Payroll logs showed a recurring clock-in for someone named Marcus Hill, marked as part-time kitchen staff. But Marcus didn't exist in the HR database. No social security number matched. The ID tied to his profile was flagged in another branch 2 years earlier during a failed embezzlement inquiry. That investigation had been closed for lack of internal proof. The manager at that branch, Brad Coleman. Jackson sat at his desk, one hand on his temple, the other flipping through printed screenshots Mara had sent. His office was quiet, but his pulse roared. The final puzzle piece came from finance. A shell LLC named Douglas Henderson Logistics had been receiving weekly payments from Sunrise's internal service fund, small enough to avoid flags, precise enough to match the exact tip differentials missing from Cassie's records. On paper, it looked like third-party staffing support, but the contact email listed on the LLC, an old personal email once tied to Brad Coleman before his promotion. Jackson didn't need more. He had everything. What had started as one waitress's scribbled notebook was now a corporate wireframe of fraud, strategic, scalable, disguised inside automation. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. This wasn't favoritism. It was systemic abuse wrapped in bureaucracy and silenced by software. And the worst part, no one questioned it because it was designed not to be questioned. The next morning, Mara activated the second phase. Terminals across 3 more branches, all showing similar anomalies, were quietly flipped into audit mode. New alerts pinged unexplained access role changes, shared login IDs, sudden drop-offs in tip reports, coinciding with shifts assigned to managers' friends or relatives. At Branch 42, a dishwasher named Rafi had been receiving digital tip deposits for 3 weeks despite never interacting with customers. At Branch 17, a support role had quietly rerouted $900 in tips to a defunct PayPal account last used in 2021. What tied all these branches together? Brad had either managed, trained, or recommended someone at each location. By Friday morning, Jackson was ready. He didn't need to yell. He didn't need to threaten. He had one thing better than authority: truth. The sun was rising as he slipped into his charcoal gray suit, the same one he wore to cut the ribbon at Sunrise's 50th location. No flannel, no hat, no disguise. This time he was walking in as himself. At exactly 9:06 a.m., the bell above the diner door rang. The room barely registered it until they looked up. There was no mistaking him now. Behind him was Mara Lynn holding a tablet already connected to the live audit dashboard. Graphs moved in real time. One showed tip distributions by name. Another displayed unauthorized role edits. A third traced weekly payouts directly to Douglas Henderson LLC. The air in the diner shifted. Brad Coleman froze mid-sentence. Tyler's hands hovered over the touchscreen, paralyzed. Even Chase, who was mid-pour at a booth, stopped the craft, trembling slightly. Jackson walked forward, calm, deliberate, voice steady. "I won't take much of your time," he said. "Just the last 15 years I spent building this company." 9:06 a.m., Sunrise Diner, No. 28. The moment Jackson Reeves stepped through the door in a sharp charcoal gray suit, the air changed. Not a single chair scraped, not a single plate clinked. It was like the building itself had paused to listen. Brad Coleman, polished and smiling only seconds earlier, froze mid-sentence near the service bar. Tyler C. Hands, hovering confidently over the POS screen, suddenly looked as though he didn't know what to press next. Even Chase, halfway through pouring a refill, stood still, carafe in one hand, confusion in his eyes. And Cassie didn't flinch. She simply stood taller. Behind Jackson, Mara Lynn stepped in, calm, measured, holding a sleek black tablet with a glowing dashboard already alive on screen. The live audit of the POSO system pulsed silently in her hands, every tip, every override, every shadow account laid bare. Jackson didn't rush. He walked with the pace of someone who wasn't here to argue. He stopped at the counter, placed his palm flat on the surface, and looked directly at Brad. His voice was low, controlled, too calm. "I once said fairness is not a slogan. It's a behavior, repeated every single day." Brad blinked. Tyler shifted slightly but didn't dare speak. "But someone rewrote the rules," Jackson continued. "Someone took a system built for transparency and turned it into a family favor bank." He turned to Mara. Without a word, she tapped the screen. 3 graphs appeared on the tablet, mirrored on the POS terminal behind Tyler for everyone to see. Tip distribution by staff name, 67% routed to Tyler. Unauthorized role assignments, custom access tied to Tyler Brad and kitchen support 03. Weekly payouts to a shell company, amounts matching missing tip differentials traced to Douglas Henderson LLC. Brad's face drained of color. Tyler's hand moved like he was about to say something, but Jackson didn't even look at him. "You didn't get 67% of tips," Jackson said flatly, "because you worked harder or served more. You got them because someone gave you keys to a door others didn't even know existed. The room held its breath. Behind Cassie, the new trainee froze mid-step. Even the line cook had stepped out quietly from the kitchen, arms folded, watching. Cassie still didn't speak, but for the first time that morning she stood still, like something inside her had been waiting for this moment longer than she'd admitted. Jackson turned back to Brad. Effective immediately, he said, you are suspended. Your records are being handed to legal. Then to Tyler. You too. There's no room here for anyone who turns transparency into a personal hustle. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. What he said next wasn't for Brad or Tyler. It was for everyone else. If you've done the work, you will be seen. If you've hidden behind smiles and loopholes, you will be removed. His gaze moved slowly across the diner. No one applauded, no one moved. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was heavier than that. The kind of silence that follows after the truth finally has a name, and it's spoken out loud. Jackson pointed to the POS terminal behind the counter. Starting today, he said, this system will no longer be controlled by a privileged few. Then he turned to the back of the diner, his eyes landing on a young man wiping his hands nervously with a towel. He looked like he'd just come off dish duty. Maybe he had. He froze when Jackson looked at him. What's your name? Jackson asked. The boy swallowed. Ben, he said. Ben Morrison. Jackson nodded once. Ben, you're the first to use the new access protocol. There was a long pause. Ben looked around like it was a trick. You mean, log in? That's right, Jackson said. No more invisible roles. No more secret overrides. From now on, if you do the work, you're the one recorded and credited. Ben stepped forward, cautiously, slowly, like the floor might vanish beneath his feet. He logged in. For the first time, his name lit up on the POS screen, not as support, not as other, but as Ben Morrison, active user. A quiet gasp came from the trainee. Behind her, Cassie exhaled, not a sigh of relief, but a release. Like pressure she didn't know she was carrying had just been lifted. She didn't say a word, but she didn't need to. Moments later, a ripple moved through the room, subtle, human. One of the newer waitresses, Emily, walked over and touched Cassie's arm gently. No words, just a hand on her sleeve. Enough to say, we saw it, we know. Jackson caught it, that small gesture, that quiet act of acknowledgement. It hit him harder than any audit ever could. Then finally, Brad emerged from the back office. No protests, no excuses. His jaw was tight, but he didn't argue. He simply looked at Tyler. Tyler didn't meet his eye, but the faint nod between them said everything. They knew it was over. Tyler removed his access card and held it out. Jackson didn't take it. He placed it on the counter untouched. Then he turned back to the team. No more manipulation, he said. No more hidden titles. From now on, if you serve, you're seen. If you show up, you're counted. This isn't just a patch, it's a new operating standard. He stepped back. No standing ovation followed, but something else did. Work resumed, slowly, deliberately, but with new eyes, with new footing. It wasn't normal yet, but for the first time in a long time, normal finally felt worth reaching for. And Cassie, she didn't smile, not fully. But when she passed by Jackson's table again, she didn't look down. She met his eyes. And that look, quiet, steady knowing, said everything. The reckoning had come, and this time it had stayed. The system changed. But what truly shifted wasn't code, it was belief. For the first time, servers didn't just work. They were seen. 1 month passed. The air inside Sunrise Diner number 28 was different now. It no longer carried the scent of silent exhaustion, that weight in the chest you couldn't name, only endure. Now it was buttered toast, the soft clink of ceramic mugs, and something new, a quiet hum of trust beginning to grow. It started with a single sound. Ding! The POS terminal lit up in green. A message appeared on the overhead screen. Table 19, $93 total, $20 tip Cassie. Table 35, $41 total, $8 tip Ben M. Table 62, $75 total, $14 tip Emily R. Names clear, verified, linked directly to the people who had earned them. No more whispers in the break room. No more, did my tip go through? No more folded paper notes hidden inside aprons. Now whoever served was seen instantly. The rebuilt POSO system was elegant in its justice. Every user ID had to match a real shift log. Tips were encrypted and tied to actual service history. No more support roles, no more kitchen ghosts, no more backdoor access. Role changes now required dual approval. All overrides were flagged. Every terminal came with a visible tip distribution screen so everyone knew in real time what was earned and where it went. But the most powerful change wasn't digital, it was human. Cassie no longer moved like someone surviving. She still worked, still trained, still cleaned tables if someone called in sick. But there was a difference now, not in her hands, but in her presence. She didn't just carry trays, she carried quiet authority. And she didn't wear her apron every day anymore, because now she wore something else, a badge that read, Regional Training Manager. Equity Systems Rollout. She didn't get promoted because she asked. She got promoted because she showed. Her notebook had triggered a chain reaction, one that even Jackson Reeves hadn't fully predicted. Across Sunrise diners nationwide, a quiet reform was unfolding one terminal at a time. She didn't travel with a PowerPoint. She didn't hold long meetings. She walked into new branches, told a story over coffee, and then simply stood near the terminal as the first name appeared on the screen, not hers, theirs. That was all it took. She carried the truth, and the truth carried weight. At Branch 42, a new hire named Nena sent her a message that Cassie would never delete. Cassie, I just wanted to say thank you. The first time I saw my name on the tip screen, I cried. I didn't know I was allowed to exist here. At Branch 17, a former server who had quit 2 years prior walked through the door one morning with no appointment and said, I don't need extra. I just want to work somewhere that doesn't erase me. The change was spreading, not because of speeches, but because of proof. At headquarters, the end-of-month analytics showed the results. Tip disputes down 89%. Role-based access violations 0. Staff turnover dropped by 18% system-wide. But that wasn't the number Jackson underlined. At the bottom of a new internal survey, a quiet question had been added with no marketing, no memo, no training deck. Do you feel seen at work? There was no metric for that, no algorithm to measure it. But Jackson knew that's the number that saves a company. Not slogans, not margins, people feeling seen. And yet the most powerful moment came quietly. Like it always does. One morning, Jackson walked into diner number 28 again. No press, no disguise, no Mara, no tablet. Just him, in line, like anyone else. He took the same corner table. The light hit the laminate surface differently now, not like something hiding dust, but like something finally allowed to shine. Cassie didn't notice him at first. She wasn't on the floor anymore. She was by the POS terminal guiding 2 new hires on how to verify their access before starting shift. Her voice was steady, confident, not forceful, just certain. The kind of certainty that didn't need volume anymore. Jackson didn't interrupt. He just watched. He finished his meal pancakes this time, and before leaving, he did something simple. He folded a $20 bill under the edge of his plate and slid a small handwritten note beside it. It read, Thank you for writing it down when everyone else looked away. You're not alone anymore, and neither is anyone else. Cassie found it while bussing the table. She didn't open it immediately. She just paused, breathed, folded it gently like something she already knew by heart. Because some words don't need to be spoken twice. Some words are felt every day. That evening, she returned home and took out her old notebook, the one she used to carry in fear it might get taken away. She didn't reread it. She didn't need to. She removed the pages slowly, carefully, placed them in an envelope, sealed it. On the front, she wrote, For whoever comes next, in case one day you need proof you're not crazy for noticing what no one else will admit. The envelope was left on the desk of a new branch manager at a location about to roll out the transparency system. No ceremony, no speech, just a quiet act of passing something forward. Because Cassie no longer needed the notebook. Now the system was doing what it should have done all along, recording the right things for the right people. Fairness, she had learned, isn't a gift, it isn't a favor, and it sure as hell isn't a policy you print once and forget. Fairness is a commitment you make over and over, even when no one's watching. And for people like Cassie, justice never came from shouting, it came from showing up, keeping notes, and choosing every single day not to look away. That's how the world starts to change. One table, one name, one page at a time. By the time the new regional memo was drafted, no one needed it. The change had already begun. Across Sunrise diners, first in clusters, then in waves, servers and bussers, who'd once lived in the shadows of the system, began to do something they hadn't dared to before. They spoke up. Not on podiums, not through complaints, but through action. At Branch 42, a line cook named Devin pinned a list to the break room wall. Tips I didn't get but saw processed. Under it, others started adding sticky notes of their own. At Branch 61, a cashier named Layla brought in her own notebook. Not to accuse, just to match what the POS was now showing her name under. I just wanted to see if the numbers lined up. They did, she said in a staff meeting. For the first time, they did. Cassie didn't ask to be the face of any movement. She never gave a TED Talk. She never went viral. But in the silence that followed her story, a space opened, and in that space, others stepped forward. Stories came in by the dozen. A dishwasher in Alabama who thought his account had been a placeholder until he saw his name in green beside a $6 tip he didn't even know existed. A high school student in Utah working weekends who saw her tips listed under someone else's name for months, until the update rolled out. Now she calls her mother during her lunch break and reads her the totals like she's sharing her report card. And a single father in Oregon too shy to speak during meetings who left an anonymous note on the new manager's desk. Thank you. I used to think my work disappeared when I clocked out. The legacy wasn't just technical, it was emotional. And no one understood that more than Jackson Reeves. Sitting in his office weeks after the rollout, surrounded by clean dashboards and stable revenue graphs, he found himself staring at the handwritten note Cassie had left in the envelope for the new manager. He'd asked for a copy, not for records, for himself. For whoever comes next in case one day you need proof you're not crazy for noticing what no one else will admit. It didn't read like a slogan. It read like scripture. He leaned back in his chair and thought of the first time he'd walked into Sunrise Diner, Chapter 28 in disguise. The flannel, the lukewarm coffee, the toast that didn't matter. Back then, he thought he was conducting an investigation. Now he understood he'd walked into a confession booth. The transparency update, which once began as a patch, had evolved into a culture reset. Each terminal across the country now opened with a message. This system honors those who serve. If you're doing the work, your name should show. If it doesn't speak up, we'll listen. Cassie had personally approved the wording. One morning at Branch 37, a customer left a $100 tip and told the server, "Make sure it goes to you, not the manager's cousin." The staff laughed, not because it was funny, but because it used to be true. And no one had said it out loud before. At Branch 17, something else happened. A part-timer named Janice, who had quit 2 years earlier after discovering her name, never once showed on tip logs, walked in one rainy Tuesday. No appointment, no fanfare. She waited in line like any customer, then approached the new branch manager. "I heard the system changed," she said quietly. The manager nodded. "Would you like to apply again?" Janice shook her head. "I already filled it out online. I don't need extra. I just want to work somewhere that doesn't erase me." They hired her on the spot. Jackson visited that branch a week later. He didn't say who he was, didn't flash a badge or wear a suit. He just watched Janice glide between tables, a gentle hum in her step. He noticed how the trainee beside her didn't just mimic her movement, he mirrored her confidence. And on the terminal screen, her name showed clearly under a $12 tip. No one questioned it. No one stole it. No one had to fight to be counted. That, Jackson thought, is what legacy looks like. One day, Marilyn sent him a short message. Final report: 32 branches, 78 rollover rides, corrected 19 phantom accounts deactivated. Total estimated redirected funds $83,500. No new violations since implementation. Staff satisfaction up, anonymous reports down. Tip share trust index 96.7%. It worked. Jackson stared at the email, then closed his laptop. He didn't need to reply. He just stood from his desk and quietly walked to the shelf where he kept his old journals. In one of them years ago, he had written something after opening his second Sunrise location. It read, "If we ever become so big we forget the hands that carry the plates, we'll deserve to collapse. I'd rather close down than turn invisible." He hadn't thought about that line in years. But now he whispered it aloud and smiled. They hadn't collapsed. They had changed. Cassie, meanwhile, kept moving. But not like before. She wasn't a ghost in an apron anymore. She was the kind of presence people made room for. She no longer carried the original notebook. It had been mailed by her request to a training institute in Detroit, where a young group of food service interns would read it as a case study on ethical systems design. She never told anyone she did that. She just did. Because real legacy isn't carved in marble or carved into the side of buildings. It's carved into choices. And at the very next location scheduled to receive the POSO's transparency upgrade, the new manager walked into his office early one morning to find an envelope on his desk. No name, no return address, just 5 words written in blue ink. "For whoever comes next, Cassie." Inside was a printed image of the original notebook's first page. Taped beneath it was a post-it that simply read, "In case you ever wonder whether something small matters, it does." Jackson Reeves never planned to build a revolution. He built a restaurant, a dream on a napkin, a small diner with decent eggs, hot coffee, and enough space for a server to feel proud walking to table 3 with a smile. But over time, with each new location, each investor meeting, each upgrade in systems and strategy, he drifted not from the vision, but from its edge. The edge where pain hides, where small things break first, where quiet people carry too much and say too little. He hadn't seen it happen. Because when the spreadsheets are full and the HR dashboards glow green, the system tells you you're doing fine. But fine is a lie when the people holding up the numbers feel invisible. And now, months after that one stormy morning in Diner No. 28, Jackson finally understood something he hadn't before. You don't fix a culture by auditing behavior. You fix it by honoring dignity. He stood quietly in the back of a new branch in Baltimore, not as a CEO, but as a visitor. Cassie was up front showing a trainee how to run a real-time shift reconciliation using the updated terminal. There were no grand speeches, no spotlights, just a sentence she kept repeating. If you see something wrong, it's not your job to fix it alone, but it's never wrong to notice. That line, 5 seconds long, landed harder than any training module Sunrise had ever rolled out. Later that evening, Jackson sat outside the diner on a bench with chipped green paint. The kind of bench meant for 5-minute breaks and cold coffee refills. He watched as the staff laughed together, not loudly, not nervously, but freely. It was different now. Something had shifted. Sunrise no longer posted motivational quotes above the break room sink. They didn't need to. They had a live tip-sharing screen that told every worker, "You matter, your effort is real, and we are paying attention." No fancy internal newsletter ever got that reaction. But this earned smiles, quiet nods, fewer resignations, more returned applications. At one location, a former employee reapplied just to say, "I heard it's different now. I want to be part of that." Back at HQ, the internal visibility pulse, a new tool Jackson commissioned, sent out one question weekly to employees nationwide. Do you feel seen at work? When the first report came in, Jackson printed it and posted it on the wall outside his office. No bar graphs, no KPIs, just one stat. 94.3% said yes. Beneath it, he scribbled in red pen, "Keep watching the quiet ones. They see everything first." Cassie never asked for more money, never requested an office, never asked to speak at a company summit. But she became the most referenced name in internal surveys. Cassie helped me believe I mattered. Cassie told me to keep writing it down. Cassie didn't promise to fix things. She just didn't look away. She wasn't a hero. She was a mirror, held up just long enough for others to realize, oh, it's not just me. One day, a high-level board member asked Jackson over coffee, "What changed the most this year?" Jackson didn't even blink. "The noise," he replied. "For years, we rewarded loud results, polished presentations, fast turnarounds. But now, the most important things start quiet. A glance, a pause, a server checking the screen and finally seeing her own name." The board member nodded, unsure whether to follow up. Jackson didn't add anything, because some answers don't need more words. One Thursday afternoon, Cassie received a package at her regional office. Inside was a single item, a folded napkin from Diner No. 28, written on it in familiar, blocky handwriting. It started with toast and coffee, but what you served was truth. Keep serving. She turned it over. On the back, it was signed JR. No letterhead, no CEO title, just initials, just acknowledgement. She placed the napkin behind the plastic sleeve of her new training binder. No one else ever saw it. By the end of the fiscal year, Sunrise had seen a measurable increase in profit, not by changing menus or raising prices, but by something HR had never tracked before. Loyalty born from fairness. Not flashy bonuses, not TikTok campaigns, just fairness. And that turned out to be the most profitable value of all. In a town far from where it all began, a new hire at Branch 54 sat down on her first break. She hadn't even memorized the POS flow yet. Cassie was there shadowing the shift. She walked by and gently asked, "You gooded?" The girl hesitated, then said, "I'm just trying to not screw up." Cassie smiled. "You're allowed to screw up. You're just not allowed to disappear." And with that, she walked on, clipboard in hand, another name on the list. This wasn't a revolution made of fire and headlines. It was a quiet one. A revolution built on a waitress keeping notes, a CEO finally listening, and a system brave enough to start again. And it continues. At every new location, with every new name on the screen, with every server who stops hiding their notebook. Not because they're afraid, but because now finally they don't need it anymore.